For those who come here seeking God, may God go with you. For those who come embracing life, may life return your affections. And for those who come to seek a path, may a way be found and the courage to take it step by step. That was a big finish. So today's service is around the question of where do we come from? What are our origins, our beginnings? And this was a sermon topic that was selected by Dennis and Marta Sleeper. They won this, the right to choose a sermon topic at our auction. And so this is the topic they chose. They wanted to look at both scientific and religious origins and evidence of our origins. So that's what this service is all about. So I'm going to tell you one of our more familiar stories of our origins. It comes from the book of Genesis. Genesis 2, chapter 2, verses 4 to 21. In the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, when no plant of the field was yet in the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up, the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living being. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. Out of the ground the Lord God made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall die." Then the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner." So out of the ground the Lord God formed every animal of the field and every bird of the air, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all cattle and to the birds of the air and to every animal of the field. But for the man there was not found a helper as his partner. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then he took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man he made into a woman and brought her to the man. Then the man said, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of man this one was taken." So that's one of our creation stories. We will look at some others later on in the service. It's nearly tadpole time. Tadpole time. When I was young, this was one of my favorite times of the year. While I grew up in a subdivision, it bordered on some wild lands, or lands at least that were wild to me as a little boy. There was a small pond within walking distance of my house that drew me like a magnet. Once the snow had melted and spring had arrived, my friends and I would hike through the woods, pretending we were Daniel Boone or some posse of outlaws, and we'd make our way to that pond and spend the day throwing rocks into the water to see who could make the biggest splash. And every year, about this time, maybe a couple of weeks from now, we'd gaze down into the water around the edge of the pond, and we'd see these large masses of gelatinous material floating just under the surface. Frogs' eggs. Frogs' eggs. They were the perfect attractant for little boys and girls. Gooey and disgusting and mysterious and just wonderful. Day after day, we'd check on the progress of the frogs' eggs, knowing what was to come. Soon, those eggs would hatch, and we'd see the pond water teeming with tiny tadpoles, no bigger than maybe the head of a pin. And on that day, we'd run back home and get a jar or a Tupperware container and get back to the pond as fast as we could. And we'd dip that jar down into the water and watch a cascade of tadpoles fall into it. You can't imagine how exciting this was to a child of 8 or 9, unless, of course, you did it too. Has anybody done this before? A few hands. So we'd take our containers home and show them to our moms, whose reactions varied from disgust to maybe encouragement. And we'd set our jars in the garage, or maybe, if we were lucky, a shelf on our bedroom, depending on how Mom felt about this whole thing. And then we'd sit, and we'd stare, and wait. And every morning when we woke up, we'd jump up and look at the jar. And we watch these little life forms and check on them every day. And the moment we got home from school, we'd run to our bedroom or to the garage and look again. Some of us took our jars to school, and we could watch them there in our classroom. And we'd share this amazing thing with our classmates. But we'd wait and wait until that morning came. That morning when we noticed legs. Legs. They were growing legs. And we'd get a bigger container and bring home some more water from the pond and transfer the tadpoles, at least those that were still alive, to a larger tank, and we'd watch the miracle continue as the legs grew. The legs grew longer and the tails grew shorter. First the back legs, then the front legs. And within a short time, these little fishy things would complete their metamorphosis into frogs. We would, of course, beg and plead with our mothers to keep those frogs, but that was usually a losing battle, and so we'd transfer them back into a Tupperware container and go down to the pond and release them. And boy, we were just amazed by that whole process. Back in those days, my tadpole days, I knew nothing, or at least very little, of science and the scientific explanation of what was going on. I learned about amphibians through this hands-on experience of observing tadpoles grow into frogs. And later, as I learned all the scientific explanations, the process got no less amazing to me. Just a couple of years ago, about this time of year, I was visiting my father-in-law, and he had built a koi pond on his property, and he had a bird bath near the koi pond, and the bird bath stood about that high by the edge of the pond. And I looked down into it one day, and what did I see but tadpoles swimming in the bird bath? Amazing. I have no idea how a frog got up into the bird bath, or maybe it dropped from a bird I have no idea how tadpoles got into the bird bath, but there they were. There they were, tadpoles in the bird bath. While science has explained all kinds of things, and scientists continue to make miraculous discoveries, mysteries still abound. Just this past week, I saw a show on TV about scientists who were searching for fossils of that mysterious transitional animal that would prove that all land animals evolved from sea creatures. That we are, in some sense, tadpoles ourselves, perhaps. And these scientists pointed out the similarity of the structure of our hands, of human hands, to the paws of other mammals and the wings of birds. Basically, all animals living on this planet, mammal or otherwise, have this same sort of anatomical structure. We have one bone leading to two bones, leading to a bunch of small bones that lead to our fingers. And that's the same for almost every animal on Earth today. But how did we make the transition from fins to this structure? That's what these scientists are trying to show and trying to prove. They're trying to find that animal that made that transition. And then just last month, scientists discovered what they're calling proof of the theory of cosmic inflation. Cosmic inflation. This theory that was developed almost 30 years ago was a way to explain some of the mysteries of the Big Bang. So using complex radiation detecting telescopes down in Antarctica, scientists have seen back in time to a moment that is billionths of a second after the instant of the Big Bang. Billionths of a second. How close are they to that actual instant? These observations, they say, take them back to an incomprehensible 10 to the minus 35 seconds. 10 to the minus 35 seconds. Now, Dennis, you may have to help me out here, but I think that's a decimal point followed by 34 zeros and a 1. Is that right? 10 to the minus 30. That's how close to the actual instant of the Big Bang scientists have gotten. I'd say that's pretty close. And even though I don't really understand all the talk about quantum energy and cosmic background microwave radiation, I am somehow just as amazed by this discovery as I was as an 8-year-old watching tadpoles become frogs. And at the same time, we've got scientists traveling back in time 14 billion years. There are others who are traveling into the subatomic universe to find the origin of life itself. Not where we come from temporally over time, but to discover how life itself begins. We all know how new life is created, how egg and sperm are joined to create new beings. But we don't know, at least not yet, we don't know what that animating power is that we call life. No one has explained how the single-cell egg and the single-cell sperm, when joined, actually becomes life. How it becomes life. We've also not been able to explain how all the star stuff floating around in the universe first became something alive. How that primordial soup produced the first forms of life, those single-celled organisms Riley referred to. Darwin's Origin of Species explains how we progressed from single-cell organisms to our own advanced life form, but it doesn't say where those first life forms came from. So there is something out there right now that scientists are working on called the Origins of Life Project. Scientists around the globe are trying to find the answer to this very question. So if all of this isn't enough to get your head spinning, last fall, scientists revealed that there are at least 9 billion, and perhaps as many as 44 billion, that's billion with a B, planets in the Milky Way that are in what's called the Goldilocks zone. The Goldilocks zone is that area where a planet is not too far from and not too close to its sun around which it's orbiting. So it's not too cold or not too hot, but just right to support life. Between 9 and 44 billion planets just in the Milky Way galaxy alone. And there are billions and billions of galaxies. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. From the epic of Gilgamesh to the 2 stories of creation in the book of Genesis. And you do know there are 2 different stories, right, in the book of Genesis. Today we heard the one about man being created out of the dust and breathed life into him. And then there was the more commonly told story about the universe and the world being created in 7 days or 6 days, and then the 7th God rested. So there are actually 2 stories in the book of Genesis. So from that to the Iroquois legend of the great turtle to the Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, all of these stories have sought to explain where we come from and how we got here. We instinctively yearn for our roots, to trace our origins back in time to Adam and Eve, to the first mother and father, to that primordial soup out of which all life sprang. How did we get here is a question as old as human time. The question of the origins of life, the origin of our lives, is a search for ourselves and a search for home in the deepest sense. It's a search for our own identity. Who are we? Who is our family? Where do we belong? Where is our home? All these questions flow from and are embedded in the search for our origins, for the search for life's beginnings. It's kind of like genealogical research on steroids, if you think about it. It's not just tracing back our own family tree, but the entire family tree of humankind. And of course, all of these questions lead to the deeper theological question, why are we here? Or put another way, what is our purpose in life? As Unitarian Universalists, we relish the search itself. Answers are fine, but they're not necessary. They're not necessary. As I've said many times before, our greatest spiritual challenge, I believe, is to learn to live with mystery, to be comfortable with the not knowing. To be comfortable with the not knowing. To cherish the quest for the true and the real and the right. To cherish the search itself. This is what sets us apart from so many other faiths, which are anxious to provide all the answers. So Riley, filling out those boxes on your homework about what we would, how we would answer those questions, I think a question mark maybe is the answer. The Bible tells us in no uncertain terms that God created the heavens and earth, although, as I said, there are two different ways that God did that in the Bible, so maybe it's not all that clear or definitive. Other faiths have their own answers to where we came from. We, on the other hand, admit to our not knowing. We admit it. We admit it. We consider all the evidence, mythological, religious, scientific, and we try to piece together a story that makes sense to us. And we know that we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, at least not yet, and that while the picture is perhaps becoming clearer and clearer, we learn to live with the uncertainty of it all. So how are you all doing with this living with the mystery thing, I wonder? To learn to live with mystery requires two essential ingredients. First, it takes an intense curiosity. Curiosity is the motivation for the search itself, for that quest. Our hunger for knowledge drives us forward to seek answers. Although we may accept that we'll never know the whole story in our own lifetime, it doesn't mean that we don't want to know as much of it as we can. To be curious is to be open-minded. It's having a willingness to be surprised. We don't put a set of beliefs into a box and then ignore new discoveries or try to somehow shoehorn new discoveries into those beliefs. We are willing to accept new discoveries, new evidence that might take us in a completely new or different direction. We're prepared to have our theories challenged and tested and perhaps even blown to smithereens. Who's to say that what we'll find on the other side of the Big Bang in that time before time? Who knows what's there? What if we discover that it was all molded and put in motion by some all-powerful being? I'm not saying that it was, but as Unitarian Universalists, when we admit that we don't know, we're also admitting to the full range of possibilities about what we don't know. We don't know, and that's okay. And we're open to what it may be and what may be revealed. And we just really, really want to keep learning more. Revelation is not sealed. You've heard us say that before, perhaps. And that means that the truth is always yet to be discovered. The second essential ingredient to accepting the mystery of life is amazement. Amazement. We need to be children of amazement. Throughout our entire lives, no matter our age, we need to keep that childlike wonder we had watching tadpoles turn into frogs. To look up at the night sky and have our breath taken away. To hear that there may be between 9 and 44 billion other planets that could support life, and instead of feeling somehow threatened by this because we're the pinnacle of creation, to go, cool, maybe we're not alone. To be children of amazement is to keep wow in our vocabulary. and to use it often. Author Anne Lamott calls wow the third great prayer, the other two being thanks and help. She has a book, Help, Thanks, Wow. And she writes this. She writes that wow is often offered with a gasp, a sharp intake of breath, when we can't think of another way to capture the sight of shocking beauty or destruction, of a sudden unbidden insight or an unexpected flash of grace. Wow, she writes, means we are not dulled to wonder. To be children of amazement, to be sure we're not dulled to wonder, means that we need to be present. We need to be aware, to pay attention to what's going on around us. And this, of course, is a deeply spiritual way of being, this idea of being present. We cannot be amazed. We can't get to wow if we're overwhelmed by the tasks of daily living, if we're constantly running from pillar to post, if we don't take time out to breathe and to notice the miracles, large and small, that are happening all around us. To begin to live with mystery, we've got to experience the mystery. To see the stars, we've got to be willing to step out into the dark night. And that sometimes can be scary. To say that we are comfortable with mystery, that we're willing to live with the not knowing, is not to say that we remain ignorant or that we deny reality. There are things that we do know for sure. That the earth is certainly more than 6,000 years old. That evolution is not simply a theory that's on a par with creationism. That there are more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on all the beaches, on all the shores of this earth. One of the beauties of our faith is that we can integrate scientific discovery with our beliefs rather than being forced to choose one side or the other. One of the things that we know for certain about the origins of life is that the more we learn about it, the more we learn that we are deeply and intimately connected to all that is. The so-called family of man or humankind isn't limited to humankind. It includes every living thing on this planet and every being that ever was. And it's even more than that. We are made up of the same stuff that make the stars and comets and all the cosmos. We are part and parcel of all that is and all that ever will be. We are learning that the universe has a coherence that can be understood and that we are part of that coherence. I, for one, am comforted by this knowledge. To know that I'm not alone, that you and I are connected, that although the span of my life is not even a blip in the history of all that is, that I am a part of it and it is a part of me. That the energy that is me will live on in some form after I'm gone, forever and ever. And so I ask you, what more than that do we need to know for sure? This day and every day I wish you peace and amazement. Blessed be.